Kathy Barnette, welcome to Dad Saves America.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I haven't had that many aspirant politicians on the show. Part of that is my more libertarian ways. It has an uncomfortable relationship with politicians.
Which is good. I think we all should.
Yes. But your story came to my attention, your personal story. And it's very powerful. And I want to start there. Because this is called Dad Saves America, and you can't be a dad unless you have your baby.
Yeah.
And this is an issue, abortion, that's very much in the foreground of our politics in the post-Roe time that we're now in.
Yeah.
I have generally tried to keep my mouth shut about it for most of my adult life. And now I feel like I have to contribute to that conversation. So tell me, share with me sort of, and with our audience, your experience of this issue very personally, because it really is a personal. You are an example of a case that is often talked about.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you my story, but I would like to ask you what caused you to change your mind about not speaking about this topic to speaking about this topic. You can answer that now or later, but I'm always interested in knowing where people are.
All right, I'll keep this quick. If you like what you're hearing and want to hear more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our new content as it comes out every week. And now, back to the conversation. Well, I'll say, and we can come back to this in our discourse together. Part of it was becoming a father myself. You see that experience happen. You see, it's a baby from the minute you know,
Yeah.
right? And then part of it is sort of the full-on assault on our kids that's happening today. I like, something's changed in our culture, and I feel like I have to fight it.
Yeah.
In a different way than I used to feel like that's not polite company. Oh, I'm a man. I shouldn't really talk about that. That has all fallen below the threshold of the times I feel like we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that, what you just expressed, is the reason why I started having this conversation, because I haven't been talking about my story for very long. I grew up in the Deep South, and one of the rules is that you just don't talk about certain things. And that was certainly my case. But because I too feel this sense of an unraveling that's taking place in our country right now, an unraveling of our values, an unraveling of our Constitution, it caused me, I began to say, if my story had the opportunity to save one life, then why would I not share that story, right? And that started me down the process of finding the words to express it, because it wasn't very easy. It's something you don't think about. It's something that causes you to have to intentionally become very vulnerable to share this aspect of yourself, especially in a contentious environment in which we're in. And yet I'm grateful that I'm here. And so for your audience, for those who don't know my story, I am byproduct of a rape. My mother was 11 years old when I was conceived. My father was 21. She had me when she was 12. And, I look at my mom. I remember as a teenager looking at my mom, my late teens, looking at my mom's birth certificate, and they had her listed as a little Negro girl, right?
This is in Alabama.
Alabama, very deep, very rural, southern part of Alabama. But I'm so grateful because my mother was too young to make this decision, obviously, but my grandparents on both sides of my family. So it's a one-stop sign town. And so everyone knew everyone. And so my family is very much involved with my father's side of the family. But that is what happened. And very grateful for the adults in the room, my grandparents from both sides, who saw value in my life. And I grew up loved. I had no idea my genesis.
When did you first find out? When did you discover this?
My mom had a lot of hatred for my father. I mean, the story is I haven't shared a lot of the nuances. Everything is nuanced, but this is one part I haven't shared. That my mother was forced to marry my father.
Really?
She was, in that part of the very deep South. I guess in their mind, they thought they were doing the best thing for my mother, who's about to have a child, and the baby should have a father. The family, we know both sides of the family. But my father was abusive towards my very young mom. I mean, it's just a lot that goes into that story and the pathology that creates as well. So I did not grow up knowing that I was a byproduct of, but my mother, and she never really shared that aspect of it. It was really me looking at my birth certificate and putting two and two together.
When did you first realize that? When did it
Really, I was
you're when you're a kid, you don't think I'm going to look at my birth certificate
no,
or
not
any
at
of that.
all. No, I was I was going to go to college. We grew up very impoverished. I grew up, like I said, on a little pig farm in southern Alabama. I grew up in a home with no insulation, no running water, outhouse in the back, well on the side. When I say poor, we couldn't afford the other O. We were just po. But I was loved. I had no idea. We were loved. I was loved. And it wasn't until I grew up and you looking back and you're like, oh my God, how
No
did we
running water.
survive that? Right? I mean, no running water, like that's a huge thing today. Like my children would know what to do.
No.
But then it was life and we were loved. I remember watching my grandparents wake up early, go to bed late, working in the field. We had like uh, peas and beans and greens all around, and my grandfather would rent the land from some of the other landowners, work that land, and then have people in the community come and pick all the peas and the things of that nature, cucumbers and all. So I grew up watching my family work very, very hard. I grew up watching them take care of the family. I remember on that little pig farm, we would go and slaughter a hog and then all this white wrapping paper. And I would sit in the front cab with my grandfather and we would go from house to house in that little community, sharing a portion of our wealth. Or waking up, and I don't know why I remember, but I remember seeing a bunch of collard greens on the front porch. Someone just dropped them off as they were on their way to another destination. Like that's the environment in which I grew up. Literally, a white Baptist church at the top of the hill. And walking down and feeling accountable to every family you walk past. Like if I did something, this is truly a village. They're going to tell my grandmama by the time I get to the house. So that was the environment. And so as a child, I knew no difference. When my grandmother would ask me to help her in the garden, I thought she just wanted to spend quality time with me. I had no idea
that you were child labor.
Well, that's one way of saying it. But truly, if we wanted beans or peas or potatoes, we had to go grow it ourselves, right? But in that space, I just remember being loved. I don't remember anyone talking to me about being a victim. I don't remember anyone saying, Kathy, you're Black, you're a woman, you're poor, hang it up, kid. I remember feeling like a sense of, excitement about the future and what I could do and become. And that led me to eventually becoming the first person in my family to go and finish college. But prior to going to college, I had to find a way to pay for school. And that path for me was to go into the military. And it was then that I had to secure my own birth certificate. And I'm looking at my birth certificate. And the first thing that jumped out at me was the fact that they listed my mother as Negro girl, and then the other was her age. And then I know my father's age, and just kind of put two and two together. And my mother never talked about it in terms of being raped. It was just her plight in life, I guess, right? But if you can imagine, there's a lot of pathologies that come from someone coming into a young person's life and disrupting it in such a way, and then having to marry the person. And I have another brother as a result of that marriage as well. And I love my family. We have a wonderful family. I love both sides of the family. And by the grace of God, he found a way for us to even, for me to have a relationship with my father before he passed.
So I want to better understand the circumstances,
Okay.
partly because I think your story offers an opportunity for people who are in the circumstances to see a path that can be taken.
Yeah.
So your father was quite a bit older than your mother, and she was, how old was she? 11?
11 at the time.
So how did they know each other? Like, what was the I didn't realize that they subsequently married at the sort of with the pressure of the family. So what were they friends? Like, what was the circumstances?
No.
I mean, was this
Again,
just an
remember,
absolute? This was just an assault. This was not like a relationship. I mean, obviously, it
no,
wouldn't like.
it
It's very
wasn't a
hard to even
relationship.
talk
Yeah.
about this, but
Yeah. Yeah, it's very hard to think, unless you're R. Kelly, of having a relationship with a 21-year-old and an 11-year-old.
My dad
right?
was Snoop Dogg. I'm sorry.
Pedophiles happen.
Or not Snoop. I'm sorry. My
No,
dad was
P. Diddy.
P. Diddy. P. Diddy.
No.
God, please, not Snoop.
No,
Come
not
on,
at
can we have a
all.
couple people survive this?
And I even remember Oprah talking about it once when she was sharing her stories and how she was raped by family members. And I think that that's, a very real aspect. And like I said, we grew up in a one-stop sign town in very rural Alabama. And around that stop sign, we probably had, I'm just guessing right at the top, but maybe 10 different families. And we did everything together. Everyone knew everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone was very involved in everyone's life. We had the church on the hill. Everyone attended that church. So it's a dynamic of, familiarity and opportunity. And so that's the
So
the
everybody
genesis.
knows each other.
Everyone knows everyone. People over at everyone's house. We would have really big parties, birthday, 4th of July, everyone from everywhere coming in. And so, my mother was just a very vulnerable young girl, and my father took advantage of that as an adult man. And
so then your grandparents, you talked about on both sides.
yeah.
So how do you understand what happened next? They knew each other, they came together and were like, hey,
well, my she's 11 and she's pregnant. And my mother could identify who it was. I don't believe there was a relationship. How can you have a relationship other than being manipulated and abused? As an 11-year-old girl, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and it pains me to imagine something like that happening to her.
It's a nightmare.
Exactly, right? And so I don't go around glorifying how I was conceived. And yet here I am, and I'm very grateful. And for me has come a wonderful marriage to an amazing man, wonderful children, a son who is now 18, off in college, my daughter 15, second in the state in track and field, just doing amazing things. And that came because someone saw value in my life, and I'm very grateful. And again, I had no idea of my own story. However, as I began to fully understand, I mean, I guess I could have done the math to see the age difference between my mom and I. But you're just living your life, and you're, rebellious kid, and you're trying, and your mom sucks. And, but, I mean, most parents do, unfortunately, to some kids, but it did help me understand, why my mother did some of the things she did, and the brokenness of my own mom, and how that translated into her parenting, for better or for worse. And so I think that was very healing for my own relationship, my own thinking with my mother, and the mistakes that she made in raising me and my family. But she worked very hard. She kept her family together, and I'm very grateful for that.
She was so young.
She was.
So her parents, what compelled them to support her to keep you? Because that is we talk about this issue. And this is one of the exceptions. This is the one that just about everybody. And I will say, I'm like with the top of the Catholic Church on this. Like, I don't see why the circumstances change the fact that you were a life from that moment for me. So that's like considered super hardcore in this debate. It's not where the public is.
It's not.
And but your grandparents, that's where they were.
And you know,
talk to me about
and
that.
probably for most Americans, they would have been there as well. They would have seen a life, right? We've evolved so much in this country. There was a time when but there was a point in time when the conversation was, oh, well, that's not a life. I'm not sure that is a life. Now with technology, people can clearly see that's a life. And so now the conversation has evolved some more to, it's all about the woman. She is God. If she says it's a life, then we will all congratulate her on this birth, this eventual birth.
If something happens to
her. But if she decides it's not a life, then, you know, so she gets to decide, the woman gets to decide if this is a life or not. That just seems like, you know, you're trying to play God, right? If I say I'm pregnant, everyone congratulates me. But if I say, you know, what about my life, what I want to do, my comforts, my conveniences, then all of a sudden it doesn't even matter any longer. And so that's where we've evolved today, that no one is even really having a discussion or a debate on whether or not the unborn child that has been conceived is a life or not. Now it's just, well, is it a convenience or not? Do you want it or not? And that just seems so trivial. But back then, our country was not so unraveled. There was a sense of morality, less chaos, less confusion. And I say that all the time. I remember going into the local store where we lived, and my grandmother, she was buying food on credit, and she had to sign her name, but instead of writing out her name, she just drew an X. I saw that. And I say to people, especially when I'm in some of these more intellectual halls of deep learning, that my grandmother could not even spell out her name, and yet she knew that what was growing in my mother was life, and that it was of value, and that it was something to be protected. And now we have, you know, some ideas are so stupid, only intellectuals will believe it. And so now we live in a society where we're all these pseudo intellectuals who will look at something like that and wait for the mother to decide if this is life or not, if this is something to be protected or valuable or not. And so I intentionally incorporate my grandparents into the telling of my story, because I'm grateful for them, and they loved me, and they were amazing people, and I am in large part because of them.
The pain to see your 11-year-old daughter be in the circumstances that your mother was in, and to be able to overcome the anger, the association,
betrayal.
You know, your birth is a reminder of this thing that happened to your mother that is absolutely like the worst of the worst kind of circumstances. And yet they said, no, they had that. Was it their faith that was at the center of that, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so sure. But again, I think it was just different times than where we live today. I used the word unraveling of our country intentionally. It's an unraveling of morality. I love reading about our founding fathers, and one of them is John Adams, and I'm out of Philadelphia, so I love the history of Pennsylvania. And I came across his letters to his wife Abigail, and in that he said, one of the quotes I remember, he said, our Constitution is made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for any other kind. Right now, I believe this is the greatest nation that has ever existed. And I grew up in that home I described, no water, no
in
insulation.
Rural Alabama.
That was the home of my great 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 grandmother, Rhoda. She was a slave. So I understand my own history. I understand the history of this nation as it dealt with Black people and all and everything that comes with that. And yet I still stand and say, this is the greatest nation that has ever existed. Not perfect, but there's no one running a close second to America. And in large part, this country is the greatest because it was founded upon the greatest political document ever written, the U.S. Constitution. But our country doesn't exist apart from the U.S. Constitution. And then I go back to John Adams, who said the Constitution doesn't exist. It only exists for conscionable people. It cannot govern unconscionable people. It cannot govern people, because he said it's only able to govern moral and religious people, people who know the difference between right and wrong. And how do you get that sense of right and wrong? Well, he says it, religion. It gives you this sense of this is right, this is wrong. But he said we can't govern unconscionable, beastly people, people who just make up morality as they go, right? The difference between right and people, when you hear the word morality, people think, oh, Christianity and really, no, just simply knowing the difference between right and wrong, right? Up from down, left from right, a boy from a girl. And when you get to a country where you can't even determine what's right, what's true, what's false, what's wrong, well, now you're in a country that is being unraveled, and I believe unraveled intentionally. And so I say all of that to say the culture in which we're living in today is very different from the culture in which my grandparents were living in. I don't think it would have taken most Americans very long to acknowledge that, yes, the circumstances by which I was conceived, I have never glorified it. And it would break my heart if something like that remotely happened to my daughter or to anyone's daughter. And yet I'm here. And yet I was alive. And yet I'm very grateful to be here. I don't think it was difficult as we purport that it is today because of the culture, everything that they were surrounded by.
It's kind of amazing that your father survived, in the sense that your grandfather, I have to imagine, was ready to put him in the ground, right?
I don't know. Like by the time I learned about my own story, my grandparents had passed away. Or to really, because I couldn't go back and ask them. Even if I did ask them, like, what would they have said to me?
Right,
I had no idea. I had no idea, based on how I was treated and how I was loved. And I knew no difference from anything else. I was provided for, cared for, and protected.
So I think that there's, at the heart of this, I want to try to steelman the other side on this and talk about it, because what's so interesting about that you are the living embodiment of the case that maybe 80% of the public would say abortion should be legal in cases of rape and incest.
Yeah.
And this is a case where it's like, underage. I mean, the whole thing, everything about it is like squarely in the target. Oh,
what's going to happen to
your
the
life?
Kid? Yeah.
The economic circumstances,
Yeah.
the sense in which like this was supposed to be a thing that would destroy your mother's life, and yet here you are. I think the argument for the mother to make the choice is, I agree with you that I think it is playing God, but I think the more complicated part is, you could say, the question of like, should the state prohibit something like this? Now, obviously, the state prohibits murder, but this does involve in this case, your mother, her body, her autonomy, this was put upon her. This was not her choice.
Yeah.
So, what do you say to the pro-choice advocate who says, look, I don't want to play God, but should we really have the government prohibiting me from making this choice for myself? And then I'm going to have to ultimately confront my maker at some point. But that's a moral question that shouldn't be
Right.
something for the state to step in and say, no, you shall not do that, in like a kind of prohibition. Like, what's your answer to that?
Yeah. This is very nuanced conversation, and I've always have approached it from that perspective. Even when I ran for office, this is not me taking my Bible and beating people over the head. This is me saying I am grateful that I was not murdered. I'm grateful that I was given an opportunity to live, and you can't argue with me on that.
Yeah.
Because the alternative would have been them looking at me and saying, I cannot stand the way she was conceived. And as such, there is no value in her, and then murder me. And I think about my babies who have come out of me. They are amazing people. And our society are going to be the better that we had them, not the worse. And so there's a chain reaction that takes place when a decision is made. And so I do not try to make people feel comfortable with the idea
Right.
that I'm alive. I'm alive, and I'm grateful for that. Now, with that understanding, I also, I'm not so callous to not understand. Like I said, the circumstances by which I was conceived, I do not glorify in that, and I would not wish that on anyone. I certainly didn't wish it on my mother. And yet, what I can say, just looking at my own story, is that my mother, as I alluded to earlier, there's a pathology that is set in motion when someone is so broken and so wounded
Yeah.
and so betrayed and so abused, and that was certainly my mother's a large part of her story. And the decisions she made as a result of that, and how she raised us, and the things that she did or didn't do, what she did to herself. No one abused my mother probably more than my mother abusing herself, right? Coping with the brokenness of it all, the unresolved, because everyone just kind of moved on, right? And my mother was just supposed to kind of move on with it. And my mother, has gone through a lot and in her later years. And, my mom and I talk about it often, that had I been aborted, who would be here now as a net to catch her? I've been able, by the grace of God, to provide a safety net for my mother and to catch her and to help her heal and to walk alongside her, to show that her life has purpose and the beautiful things that have come out of such a horrible, out of the ashes, right? The beauty that has come out of the ashes, as a result of her and her strength and her fortitude, but also with addictions and being there to capture her, to catch her, and to move alongside her. Who would have been there for all of that? She would have been just another person caught up in the system of things. Here's the reality. There is brokenness all around us. None of us have any idea of what other people are truly going through. We look at social media, we see a photo, which is just a snapshot in time. We don't know what happened before. We don't know what's happening after that photo. We just see a snapshot, ready, set, smile. And that's all we see. We don't see the brokenness. And traveling the nation as I did when I ran for office against Dr. Oz, traveling alongside Vivek Ramaswamy, who I was a part of his campaign, seeing people all across the nation, there's a tremendous amount of brokenness that is all around us. And would my mother have just been swallowed up in all of that had I not been allowed to live? But because I was, not only have I been able to create an amazing life for myself that I'm very grateful for, with an amazing man and amazing children, but I've also been there to catch my mother. And so, but had I been
Yeah.
aborted, none of that would have happened. And so that's my two responses, right? One of, if you have a problem with me being alive, that's your problem more than it is my problem.
It's a hard argument.
But secondly, so I offer no apologies or let me make you feel comfortable with the idea that I'm pro-life. I'm pro-life for very obvious reasons. Because the counter is for me not to be here. But then secondly, the wrong had already been committed against my mother. what my dad did, it was a wrong committed, a grave injustice committed against my mother. Murdering me would not have resolved that wrong that had been inflicted upon my mother. Murdering me would have ensured that there would be no one there to catch my mother during her time when she needed someone to come alongside her and to help her rebuild a life that she is now proud to be living. And so I'm very grateful for that aspect of it. But then lastly, we as a nation, I know, the conversation is all about the autonomy of the woman and her making, this is her decision about her body. But as a society, we have a role to play in determining what kind of society we want to live in. And so to that extent, the government does play a role. The government, every decision is a political decision, whether to run a light, the taxes we pay, the inflation on the prices, to go to school, not to go to school. The government is involved in a number of aspects. In almost every aspect. I'm trying to think of an aspect where the government is not, and maybe that's part of the problem. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that the government does have a role to play in what kind of society creates a healthier society. The family is the bedrock of every government, federal, state, or local. And so the government does have a role to play in determining what are the rules and the policies and the environment that allows the bedrock of our society, the family, to be the strongest that it can be.
So you mentioned something here that I think is a lot of things, but one thing in particular was in thinking about that Adams vision for what the Constitution was capable of being for us, right? Like that it demanded a moral people. It demanded a people that didn't need, one way to think about that is that you can't legislate every single choice. The culture and the morality of the people ultimately is the governing force. And I'm with you that there has been an attack on those basic moral foundations to such an extent in our culture that we don't govern ourselves anymore.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to overstate that. It's not that nobody does it. There's plenty of good people in this country. Yes. But when we have a culture that, for example, you can't encounter like a romantic TV show or movie where as soon as there's the slightest spark of interest, people have sex. They get in bed. It's like, there's no, it's like instant. It's
the
instant.
Wind blows.
It's like, oh, I think I might like him. And that's that. Or her, like it's I think I might like him or her is often the conversation that comes the next day. So that's become the norm.
Yeah.
And I don't think the government can create these norms, but there is this feedback loop that, frankly, I didn't used to be as sensitive to as I am now. It's like, how are we capable as a people of being free if we don't recognize when there's something wrong? And frankly, put a little shame on it. Like no one can be shamed anymore. No one can feel judged. If you are, no matter what your choice is, it is supposed to be affirmed. It is supposed to be celebrated. You are supposed to feel no discomfort. And it doesn't seem like a world in which no choices face any friction or social consequence is compatible with the kind of legal free society that the founders began to build. I mean, is that how you think about it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to have these guardrails of right and wrong, true, false, right? A boy cannot be a girl. A girl, no matter how you feel, cannot be a boy, right? But we have left the realm of having these kinds of debates. Like, I'm perfectly willing and open to have debates and arguments and reasoning, right? Like iron sharpening iron with people. But how can you have such a thing when the vocabulary that you can use is all around how you feel and how what you believe and what you want and what you think, and
Your
when
truth.
your truth versus the truth, right? I don't believe any of us own the market on truth, but I do believe truth exists. And I do believe it's our responsibility to work out and discipline ourselves to such an extent to be able to seek out that truth, right? And then once you find the truth, not my truth, your truth, somebody else's truth, but once we find some semblance of what we believe to be true, put a stake in the ground until better information comes, and then you uproot that stake and you move to where the better information is. But in the culture in which we're living in, we can only have these rigorous discussions using a certain set of vocabulary that doesn't bring into the fact of XY chromosomes, for example,
Yeah.
or gametes or any of that.
That issue, the trans issue, has been a big head smasher for me, because it's like, well, hold on now we can't, now that's outrageous to say what you just said. Like, what you just said is now considered outrageous, and 5 minutes ago everyone would be looking at you like, well, of course, like,
Well, of course.
what are you even talking about?
But now we have to kind of like wait until to see, right? I mean, and it's very nuanced. Everything I was saying to some of your people earlier is that we live in a world where I can't find many topics that is black and white.
Mm-mm.
Everything has context. Everything has a historical context. Everything is nuanced, right? And you have to take into consideration where other people are coming from in that position. And to that extent, you can have empathy and you can sympathize and stuff like that. But it doesn't negate truth. Still there, still facts. So I believe that the feelings you're feeling may be real feeling. I acknowledge that. But that doesn't negate the fact that you are not a girl, little boy, and that you should not be competing with little girls, little boy, and that you, little boy, should not be going into the bathrooms and showering next to my little girl, right? So I can acknowledge that your feelings, that the feelings you're feeling are very real feelings to you, but they're feelings. And yet at the same time, be able to interject and say, I have just as much right to speak into the kind of world I want to live in and into the kind of culture I want to raise my children in. But we live in a society that another weapon they use is to mock you, to marginalize you, to minimize your thoughts on it, to shame you. Like, they cannot be shamed, but they shame us quite often into silence.
Well, one of the areas where shame is alive and well is when it comes to issues around race and identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've had to experience you are like a lightning rod along multiple dimensions.
Am I? I don't feel that way.
Well, I just look, I mean, you know, we got a lot to cover, and we're going to get to some of your political experience, but one of the things I did want to hear more about was during your Senate run, which was in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you were in Pennsylvania, which is a swing state. I'm a Pennsylvanian. I was born in Philly.
Yeah.
Philly's very diverse politically. It's sort of blue on the edges and deep red in the middle. So as you traversed the state, telling your story, taking the stance you took in favor of the unborn, what did you hear from people? How did it impact the way you think about the issue? Like, I'd like to hear some of the stories you were told, including the stories from people who opposed you and confronted you with circumstances that they said, look, I needed this, is, if not for having access to this, X, Y, and Z would have happened. Give me a sense of what you learned on the trail.
I loved my time on the trail. It was 15 months of, grinding. Just to give perspective, I spent $1.6 million in that race. That's all I had. the other two, I mean, it was a field of maybe 10 of us,
Yeah.
but I was in a statistical three-way tie for first place. So I spent $1.6 million, and the other two gentlemen who were in first place spent $60 million combined.
Which is insane. Yeah, I was
And
looking at the numbers. It was a very narrow margin.
and I got almost, no one got a full third, but I almost got a third of the vote, or almost 30% of the vote. Over 330,000 Pennsylvanians came out and voted for me.
I put the numbers down here.
Good.
Just because. So, in the final count, Dr. Oz, TV celebrity, got 420,000 votes. David McCormick, who I think maybe he was like a more mainstream, old school looking Republican kind of guy. I don't really remember because I was very much here in Texas for a long time at that point. He had just a little bit below that, 419 and change. And you had 331,000 in the final tally. No one else was even remotely close. No one else was above 75,000. So you were in the top three, having been outspent by what's
60, 50 to 1?
Yeah. So
60 to 1.
That's crazy. And in the early run-up, I mean, you were very close to...
Oh, we were about to win.
You were really close. Like, you rejigger the circumstances and you're the nominee there.
We were about to win. The reason why literal hell broke loose on those last 5 days, because they got the message like, oh my goodness, this chick
we gotta get this lady out of here.
Come hell or high water.
She's gonna smash a lot of stuff.
Yes, unfortunately, I believe that was a part of the thinking. And what was surprising is that level of thinking of get her out of here did not come from the Democrat Party, did not come from the left. It came from my party, the Republican Party, and specifically even among some I would have considered MAGA, right? And so that was I mean, it was the last 5 days of a 15-month race. And so in those last 5 days is when, the dam broke. And, the first day...
Didn't end up working out, by the way. John Fetterman won by 5 points. So,
yeah.
Great job.
And I think it is
if that's what you're concerned about.
And I think it's done a lot of harm that we're experiencing now, even during this presidential election. The apathy. There was when you're working with $1.6 million, I only had money for 3 hires. So I had a driver, I had a scheduler, and I had 1 field director. But I'm not exaggerating, thousands of volunteers. Like, everyone took arm. This was their opportunity. This was their 2016 moment again, right? When MAGA helped Donald Trump win office. So this was that feeling again, like we have an opportunity for someone better, someone who will actually represent us and our values. And so people took it personal, and because Donald Trump, if you remember in 2016, Donald Trump did not enjoy the swooning of the elites as he is now within the Republican Party.
Well, and we don't endorse candidates or anything like this on this show. I didn't vote for Trump in 2016.
I absolutely did. Absolutely.
I mean, I abstained. I didn't vote for anybody in 2016. I was like, first of all, and actually, let's talk about this for a little bit. Let's talk about Trump. We can come back to some of the others.
Yeah.
Because you were very much, in fact, I think I have a couple things here. Time magazine said Kathy Barnette is the Trumpiest candidate who wasn't endorsed by Trump.
Yeah. They actually came up with the title Ultra MAGA just to define me. I wasn't just MAGA.
You were Ultra MAGA. You were the Voltron of MAGA.
And then so they defined me as Ultra MAGA, but then as the media, they come back and say, well, what do you think that mean? I was like, I have no idea. I think it means gas at $1.82 again. A secure border. Like, that seems pretty Ultra MAGA to me. I don't know how you want to define me.
How many blackface of white supremacy did you get?
Yeah.
Like Larry Elder. That's the really crazy one.
Every outdoor rally I would hold, Black Lives Matter showed up at every last one of them. And it wasn't a black face in a bunch of them. It was always young, white, kids wearing Veronica Beard jackets and, Prada purses and Sam Elderman shoes on. Right? And I would notice them, I would get off the stage and I would walk right over to them as a beeline and start having a conversation.
Okay, give me some of these. What was the
that is
most
what I
interesting?
did.
What was the most interesting conversation you heard
Probably
from the
in 2020 when I ran, there was, now I'm in the general election. So now it is incumbent upon you as a candidate to not just talk to people who eat red meat. You got to now go out and sell this red meat to other people who don't even know right now that they like you.
Was this
and
for
that
House?
they're
What was your
conservative.
2020
This
run?
is House.
Okay.
So this is my very first time ever running for office. I had never even attended in my memory a Republican event, but I'm looking around in 2019, toward the end of 2019, and I'm like, if we do not get better people in office, we are going to be in a world of hurt, right? So I'm looking around, waiting for another better person, looking for the better person. But looking at what was coming up and saying, no, I think we can do better. And this was my first time ever running for office. And I won the primary, and now I'm in the general election. But this is in 2020, if you remember what happened in 2020. So no one was allowed to go outside unless you were Black Lives Matter and Antifa looking to destroy or burn down buildings. Then you were allowed to go outside. Kids couldn't go to school.
I wish that just sounded like crazy hyperbole instead of being a reasonable description of the facts.
Businesses were shut down. Dr. Levine was putting COVID-19 positive patients inside of nursing homes, and people were dying left and right. So, but Black Lives Matter was having a really big rally. And
well, there was one patient that Levine didn't put in the nursing home.
His mother. Yes, very true.
As a Pennsylvanian, I was following that more closely than the average American.
It's just a travesty, and it's really sad because so many people lost their lives. But nonetheless, I'm in the general election. I need to get in front of more people who aren't Republicans. And Black Lives Matter was having a rally in Pottstown, which has a population of all of Montgomery County. The Black population is about 10%. And a large number of those Black people live in Pottstown. So I'm like, I need to be invited. So I call, Black Lives Matter was hosting the rally, but the NAACP was also hosting. So I call and I'm like, I'm looking at the list of your speakers. My name is not on the list. Surely you made a mistake. I'm the first Black person. I mean, you guys care so much about first. I'm the first Black person to ever run for office, for a congressional seat. Surely you want me
in that district
in Montgomery County, the first Black person. Montgomery County is the third largest county. You have Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Allegheny, and then you have Montgomery County. It's the second wealthiest county in the entire state. And here I am. I just won the Republican nomination. And I'm the first Black person to ever have done that. Surely you want me to come and speak. They were like, no, we don't. So I took my little team of 3 and we had a camera, and I marched up on stage, took the mic, and said, I'm Black. What are you going to do about it? And started talking to, it looked like thousands of Black people, and you can never get Black people to show up at a political rally. So this was huge.
That doesn't seem like quite a fair statement. You can never get Black people.
Rarely can you get 1,000 Black people in a room without Beyonce, Jay-Z, or something else, right? I mean, I mean,
I'll take your word for it.
Fact check it. Here's the reason why when Hillary Clinton was running, she brought Jay-Z, Beyonce, Chance the Rapper, all of these people throwing out the N-word, doing, their songs. And that was the way they drew people. Kamala Harris just had a rally, I believe it was in Atlanta, Georgia. And in order to draw people in, she had Megan Thee Stallion on stage twerking. After Megan was done, the reports are that people started leaving the building, right? So anyway, I say all of that to say, not to shame Black people, but just to put it on record.
You're kind of shaming Black people.
No, then I think we need to be very awake and aware of what's going on in our communities. And that was my reason for showing up.
Well, okay, so before we move on, what was the most interesting conversation you had with these rally people
Yeah.
that were on the other side of the political aisle from you?
When I was done, I got an ovation. They were already standing, we're outside, but I got an ovation. And I did this 3 different times. When I found out Black Lives Matter was having a rally in predominantly Black communities, I would show up and find a way to grab the mic and began to, because Black people are not special little unicorns. We want what everyone else want. We want good we want good schools. We want safe streets. We want thriving jobs in our communities. We don't want liquor stores on every street corner, right? Uh, but how do you know that when you go into these predominantly Black community and there is no diversity of thought? You would be hard pressed to find a Republican or a conservative occupying any office. And that is what my book was about when I released it in 2020, called Nothing to Lose, Everything to Gain, Being Black and Conservative in America. It was really a clarion call, putting out a harbinger for the rest of America. Look at the Black community as a petri dish of what happens when you have no diversity of thought, where you're hard pressed to find a Republican or a conservative occupying. Democrats have carte blanche. They have free reign to do whatever they want to do. Look at the Black community as a petri dish of what happens in that kind of environment. People are left broke, broken, bruised. And what we see, this is me putting out this harbinger in 2020, if we lose 2020, what has been perfected within within the Black community is going to begin to spill over, and is going to infect the broader American culture. And that is exactly where we find ourselves today, the debasing of the culture. And this is not all of the Black community, but there are pockets within the Black community that now, I mean, it's very discouraging to see some of the most debased attitudes and behaviors are being elevated and pointed to as that's Black culture. That's what it means to be Black.
I mean, when you say debate, are you just talking about like rap culture, just being
Now, when I grew
sexually
up,
promiscuous and
yeah.
all that kind of stuff?
For example, when I was writing the book, I was walking through the house. I rarely watch television, but for some reason, there was an old school throwback movie on, and the channel was set to BET. Rarely watch it, but that particular day it was on. It was a throwback movie when I was a kid, so I'm watching it. And as I'm walking throughout the house, I could hear when the commercial comes on. And the commercial was, all it said was, this is what it means to be Black. This is what it means to be Black. This is what it means to be Black. And I wasn't watching, but I could hear it. And the commercial came on. It was probably about the 3rd time the commercial came on that I said, let me go look and see. And I'm looking, and all it said was, this is what it means to be Black. This is what it means to be Black. And every time they said it, they had some caricature of what they believe of a behavior and attitude that they believe to be Black. And it was a young Black man in a big leather bomber jacket with a gold chain, kneeling down. And every time they say, this is what it means to be Black, you see the camera flash, and the young man you see a woman scantily dressed, her bottom out, just standing there. This is what it means to be Black. In the background, you see 2 Black boys up on a vehicle that's going with the hydraulics going up and down. This is what it means to be Black. And I'm like, that is not what it means to be Black. But these are the caricatures. It's kind of like the blackface of today, of the culture, of what they think it means to be Black. And they're elevating it. And if someone like myself says, no, that's not what it means to be Black. When I grew up, that was not the example of what it means to be Black. That those behaviors will leave us broke, broken, bruised, disillusioned, and just run aground. That is not what it means to be Black. None of those things lead to life. None of those things lead to prosperity. None of those things lead to dignity within oneself.
The one of the challenges, I think, is that we have this really weird situation in this country today, which is you go back to 2013. I pulled this graph in to reference. It's from let me find it. Here it is. This was from Gallup. That as recently as 2013, the question was asked, would you say relations between white and black people are very good, somewhat bad, or very bad? The percentage who said very or somewhat good in 2013 was 72% for white people and 66% for black people. In both cases, this was adults. 2013. Today, well, 2021, which is the last time this particular survey had data, those numbers are cut almost in half. They are literally in half for black adults. 33% say that relations between black and white people in America are very or somewhat good, and 43% white people. So we have had, and actually the ironic thing is, it's like there were like the going back to 2001, those relatively high, like super majority numbers of somewhat or very good were consistent. And then in 2014, 15, and beyond, a total collapse.
Right.
To a place where a minority of people and a third of African Americans say relations are good or very good. How do you think about what has happened? Because it isn't the case that racism has gotten worse in America since from 2013 to 2021. It isn't the case that police have started to behave differently,
right,
from 2013 to 2021. Roland Fryer, the economist out of Harvard, has done the work on that from the police perspective, but others have as well.
Right.
It seems like and this is perception.
Right. And perception is what?
In this case, it is reality because it's the culture. What happened? What happened starting in 2013 that how we see each other as black and white Americans, and I find these categories to be kind of silly in and of themselves, but especially for white, like I'm like Italian American. We never saw ourselves as white. Like I don't know what any of that means.
In 2013, we had the first black president.
Right. So he's elected in 2008, takes office to 2019. 2009.
Yet, according to this data, and I've read that data before, that data point before.
The collapse starts under Obama.
I know, isn't that weird?
Well, there's a partisan read on this, but dig below the surface. What's really happened from your perspective?
Yeah. I don't believe we are at this point what I call an unraveling of America by accident. I believe it is very intentional. And I believe you kind of go backwards, starting with John Adams and his quote that our Constitution is made only for a moral and religious people. Well, how do you unravel a nation? Well, you make them immoral. You make truth, your truth, my truth. And and then you begin to move backward. You make them ungovernable. Because if your truth is something I have to adhere to, and then my truth, and then this person's truth, well, what is true? What can we do, right? So I believe that this unraveling starts with an unraveling of this sense of right and wrong. And it just kind of goes back from there. And it's been very intentional of telling people, think about it. We have raised probably 2 generations of kids now to believe that they are victims. First, it started with the Black community, but now, as I said in my book, this will spill out beyond the Black community. And now I'm seeing Indian Americans talk about being a victim, Asian, Chinese Americans talking from the perspective, using the vocabulary of being a victim, white children, I call it oppression Olympics.
Yeah.
How oppressed you are.
Well, they show the intersectional
value.
hierarchy thing,
and so everyone is trying to find a way to be impressive. Like they're not doing anything within their own right to be impressive. We're not building anything. So now we got to find ways to tear down the system because I can't offer anything to the system. I can't build the system. And so, and all of these things have been very intentional over time. And this is where we find ourselves today.
Whose intention? Because intention implies people that are acting with a purpose. So whose intention?
Now, who it is goes by different names, but and I don't know if we even care to define what we care about.
It kind of matters if you think it's intentional, doesn't it?
Well, I think what we care about is to acknowledge the outcome and to get more and more people to see the outcome, right? Like, do I really care that that it's you who's poking me, or do I care the fact that I'm being poked? And I want you to stop poking me, right? And what do I need to do to get you from being in a position to poke me? Because once you start saying, oh, it's this, once we start labeling, people get distracted and go off into, you know, their rabbit holes is what I found in life. I think is, you know, I have some ideas of who the they may be, but I have to work very hard to single my thoughts from, well, why are they doing what they're doing? Who's doing it and why are they doing it? To what are the results? And how do I get other people to see that this is what's happening? Because just because I see it or you see it is not enough, apparently. We have to get far more Americans to see what is happening and to say, I reject this. I no longer want this. And so that is what, and the question is like, does how much of how painful does it have to be for Americans to wake up from our slumber and see that we are not who we were just 4 years ago, just 10 years ago, that we are being unraveled and that this unraveling is intentional?
We agree on a lot of things. So I'm going to try to represent the other side as best I can in good faith. And I think the counter argument would probably go something like this for you. I mean, you're making sort of a broad claim, but hey, the people who want the culture to change in the way that it has changed, who dominate the culture, the academic elite, the sort of corporate sort of virtue signaling class. I know that's not really being fair to them, but so be it. But the political left, the progressive reformers and activists, what they, I think, say is, look, you're telling a story that you've even been part of, which is you came from a family who was enslaved in this country, and that we have had structural inequities and racism in this country, both legally and then it echoes into the culture to this very day. And we have to aggressively attack these structures because they have sustained genuine oppression. And yes, that's messy and disruptive, but I am not the person that's in favor of this. I'm not twirling my mustache like a satanic villain. Right. I want the world to be better. My focus is on the people who have been left behind, who are at the margin, not the people who are in power. They always do great. I want to disrupt the structures for their benefit and for those who have truly been victimized. I think that's a reasonable portrayal of where that activist in that Black Lives Matter rally that you're giving a speech at would be coming from if they could be articulate enough to voice it. But I think I'm trying to use their language and be fair to it. How do you respond to that? What's your counter to that?
Yeah. And I do believe that there are certain people who believe that what they're doing is good and benevolent and that they have admirable intentions in what they're doing.
Don't you think that's most people?
No.
You don't?
I don't, because like I said, I believe it's intentional, this unraveling where we find
ourselves. But even in the intent, don't you think they ultimately think they're doing the right thing?
Well, you can just, for me, I mean, I don't think you have to have a Harvard PhD to be able to look around and say, well, the proof would be in the pudding, right?
Yeah, fair.
Do your life feel better right now? Do you feel like you have more money in your pocketbook than you did just 4 short years ago? What about the wars, and rumors of wars all around us? What about the people who are flooding into our country? Like, these are very factual things. And hence the reason why I try to move out of the conversation of, well, this is how I feel and what I think and what I believe. And let's just talk about, well, what are the facts? Well, what's true? What's not true? And I don't have to talk about, well, my intentions are admirable when I can just look to see, has my life improved or not improved since you've been in office? And I think for most Americans right now, what we're going to find out in a couple of, less than 30 days is that, do most people believe that their life was better just 4 short years ago under Donald Trump, or if it's better today? But when I'm standing in front of Black people, when I went into predominantly Black churches, when I was at, Black Lives Matter rally, this is in 2020 and 2022, that was my question. I would say to them, LBJ takes office. He pushes through 84. I mean, it's the most unprecedented bill ever in U.S. history. 84 bills under the Great Society Act. And they were the overwhelming majority of those bills. The intent was to improve our lives as Black people primarily, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you don't have to take my word for it. Let's just look at the city in which I'm standing in. If I'm standing in a predominantly Black city, this is 60 years later now. And I think it's a legitimate question to ask, what have we gotten for being so loyal to the Democrat Party over 60 years? How many more generations are you willing to sacrifice under other people telling you, well, just get us in office, get us in a position of authority and power, and these are our policies, the intentions, that it's so admirable, you're going to feel good about it all? Look at the proof is in the pudding. We've dedicated 60 years under these policies that introduced the welfare state, which the welfare state has done what slavery could not do. The welfare state has done what Jim Crow laws would have never been able to do. The welfare state has done what racism could never do, and that is to destroy the Black family.
That sounds like an incredibly strong statement that many viewers might find hard to hear. I personally think that is an empirical fact.
It is an empirical fact.
Like, if you look at, and Thomas Sowell and others have looked at this, but this is just the data. If you look at the Black family, Black marriages were more intact than Italian American families.
Yes. More Black people were getting married. More Black people were getting married than white people between the late 1800s and 1925. More Black people were getting married. 86% of children, yes, Black children, were in a 2-parent household. Today it's the inverse of 26% of Black children, right? So these are facts. Yeah, and I know people don't like facts, right? Because we want to talk about how we feel and what I think and what I believe. And books have been written. Revisionist history has gone before us. But these are the facts. And when I go into Black communities, I start off with, hello, my name is Kathy Barnette and I'm a Republican. Now get out of your emotions. And I do it all with a smile. And I've never been accosted. Instead, I get applause, because Black people, the overwhelming majority of Black people, they want what you want. And you're predominantly white neighborhood, right? They want the same thing. They want their trash to be picked up. Why is it I drive through all kinds of communities? If I'm leaving Montgomery County going into Center City, Philadelphia, you typically take the streets versus the freeway, and you go through all types of community. I know when I've entered into the Italian community, the Jewish community, the Hispanic community. Why is it that when I get into the Black community, there are mattresses on every street corner? There are just bags lined with trash, right? It's like concrete jungle. There's no greenery. There's no trees. There's no grass, right? There's, liquor stores on every corner. Why is that? Black people, the overwhelming majority of Black people, good Black people, they want what everyone else wants. We want to send our kids to good schools, right? We don't want from school to prison for our children. We want what everyone else wants. And yet you stand back and you look at all of this and you say, and I'm saying to the Black community, 60 years We have, no one has had carte blanche in the Black community like the left, i.e. communists, i.e. Democrats. You label them however you want. They're not very liberal. They don't feel progressive. They actually feel regressive, right? They're not progressing us anywhere to any place that's good. So you label them how you want, but how many more generations of your children are you willing to sacrifice on the altar of, well, if you're Black, you got to be Democrat?
That seems like it's starting to change, and I think it's one of the weirdest things in our politics. I pulled some of this data to talk about. So in 2020, 92% of Black voters cast their ballot for President Biden.
How many? 92?
92%. So only 8% for Donald Trump.
And that's huge, even with because
but
it's usually 95 to 97%.
But I don't think there's the only way you can find that level of partisan support is if you go into an American newsroom, which are 92, 93% Democrat. Berkeley, California didn't have 92% voting for. But here's what's interesting. Among younger African Americans, 18 to 49, this was from Pew. The support, the move right is now 17%.
Yeah.
And among all non-whites, there is a collapse in support. It's still majorities, but there is a collapse in support for the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
There's a big gender divide too here. So African American men, especially young African American men, are increasingly exiting the Democratic Party. Yeah. According to this was from the Survey on American Life. Growing gender divide, it was only 62% who said they are affiliated with or lean towards the Democratic Party. That means 38% of Black men were saying in 2022 that they have moved away. That is down from over 80 to 90, pushing 90%. Is this is against the backdrop of Donald Trump, who, again, I think is a deeply flawed person. I want to talk about some of that with you because he's, especially as a Christian, as somebody who's got strong moral values, like he's a compromised guy in a lot of ways personally. But that's a transformational change to happen against the backdrop of what we are told is the most racist president we've ever had since Woodrow Wilson, although the left doesn't say that. They don't like to admit that he was the worst racist ever. But how do you? Yeah. What's going on there? What's going on that Mr. Horrible Orange Racist has presided over a period of transformation in the Black community, among Black Americans? Yeah. What's going on?
I'm glad you said that. We are diverse, even as Black people.
I hate these terms. These giant monolithic communities. That's not a thing. That's not what community is.
So much that is really good, and we can park on any of them and double click. But let me just see. Donald Trump, deeply flawed. Well, I'm deeply flawed as well. Right?
Well, let's set that one aside. I want to focus on what's happening with
the Black community
in Black politics. This has been a lot of this conversation. So what's happened?
Yeah. Exactly what we've been talking about. And yes, I saw it in 2020 when I started although in 2020 I was in a Republican primary. So generally the theme is when you're running, a political consultant would tell you, don't go into Democrat communities yet. Just focus on white Republicans. Go into all of these places. But I knew I was going to win. I felt strongly I was going to win. And so I was priming the pump for when I left the primary and went into the general. And plus, I wanted Black people to know what it felt like to be wooed. This is what it feels like when a politician comes into your community and they believe what you have is of value to them and they want it. This is what it feels like, right? And so I was intentionally going into predominantly Black communities. And what I saw in 2020 in these Black communities, that essentially Black women would not show up. Black women didn't want to have anything to do with me. And if I did walk into a room with them, they were primarily mean mugging me if they found out I was a Republican and running for office. Okay. But Black men, their ears were perked. They were listening.
And the
and
data
they were
supports
listening
that.
with their heart. And they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I would come in with the stats. I would come in with large graphs and I just sit it there. Every list that measures anything positive, Black men are at the bottom of that list. Aren't you tired? Don't you want something better? Right? And then I would ask them questions. In 2020, we were having the conversations about only Black people don't have ID. Right? So as a result, we should just do, like they didn't say white people didn't have IDs. They didn't say Hispanics or Asians didn't have IDs. They exclusively limited it to Black people. And I would say, open up your wallets. I'm not going to ask you for any of your money. I just want you to, if you have an ID, pull it out. And then I would talk to them about what the messaging is all around the world, that only Black people are so dumb and so lazy, that only we don't know how to go get an ID. Everybody else knows. So let's lower the bar so that we can help these poor people, right? And I said, but look at you. Now, there was one person who had an ID, but it was expired. And I was like, now go fix that. But you have an ID. So you know where it's located, right? This is the bar of low expectation that they only preserve for Black people. And what I saw in 2020 is what I told Vivek when he was running last year and we were on the campaign trail, is that, and I was the one who set up his meeting to go into the South Side of Chicago, standing room only, predominantly Black men. And I was explaining to him and to the team, Black men specifically are ready. They're open. But the Republican Party has to do a much better job and going into those communities, because I believe they're open. Now, are they going to go in and pull the lever? That's something to be decided. But they're open to the message like I have never seen Black people open to a message outside of the Democrat Party. But we have to be willing to go in and have that hard conversation. It's not scripted. Allow people to talk and ask questions and say it in the way that they want to say it. And then you respond to that in the most authentic self that you can bring to the table in that environment. And it was standing room only.
So,
and let me just say,
go for it.
Donald Trump, not the Republican Party. The Republican Party sucks at going into, the Republican Party talks every year about going into the Black community. The Republican Party has no intentions of going into the Black community. It has been Donald Trump who has been very specific about when he was in office in 2016. He was very specific in talking to the Black community, and he wasn't bringing Beyonce, Jay-Z, and Megan Thee Stallion to talk to the Black people. He brought in Black businessmen, and he came up with the plan, and he came up with opportunity zones that when implemented, they were actually improving the lives of Black people. He was deregulating, which is really huge. One of the 3 top industries for Black businesses is in the hair and nail salon, and the number of regulations that the Democrat Party has put on people who just want to sit in their home and braid hair. Donald Trump came in and reversed all of that. So these were very real, very tangible. This is how you show up when you think the people you're talking to have value. And that is what Black people, Black men specifically, are responding to. Not the gold sneakers, the gold shoes. That's what Republicans focus on.
I mean,
But he's talking about real ideas.
Donald Trump did get featured in a lot of the rap songs that you don't like particularly much.
Before they hated him.
Yeah, right.
He was a cool, every Black rapper aspired to be Donald Trump. Donald Trump rich, Donald Trump like, right? It was only when, and this is the, this is the power of the media, of how they can take something and they can mar it and sully it and, and cast doubt on it. And it also puts a spotlight on the fact that Republicans don't have a counterpoint to what Democrats are doing. And so they allow Democrats to set the narrative and to run with it. And that has not served us well.
To come to Trump. So my relationship with Trump heading into 2016 was kind of funny as a Philadelphian and somebody who spent a lot of time in South Jersey. I actually was technically an employee. So I waited tables at Trump Arena in Atlantic City for several summers. So I everything about him in 2016 was weird. It was like, wait a second. This was a guy that was partying with the Clintons, that was a New York billionaire that the media loved, Whoopi Goldberg loved until 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And so my worry was like, this is like a fake conservative grifter guy who's going to come in and talk, and because he's gotten old and grumpy, is running as a Republican. But it is going to be like a mushy, moderate, left of center cosmopolitan guy. That obviously turned out to not be true.
Right.
But that was one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle, if you're a Christian, if you care about moral character, if you care about the moral character of our leaders, this is a guy with multiple divorces,
Right.
with who say what you will about the Stormy Daniels thing, but it's not good to be messing around with porn stars. Whatever happened there, it's still gross. It's still not good. He knew Jeffrey Epstein and had multiple interactions with him. I know he disavows it, but I'm piling on here for a reason. Because I think for people, and I would put myself in this category, who are seeing these things not just Democrat, Republican, and the system versus the people outside of it, but who are looking at Trump and people like you who've come into really big supporters of him, there's like a dissonance.
Right.
So help me with, why would you see that character with all his flaws as someone who is like a pro-life Christian?
Yeah.
He was pro-life, pro-choice until 5 minutes ago, even given his incredible actual actions on the court side. Like, he's the most functionally pro-life president in modern American history because of the court. But in terms of prior to that was really the biggest surprise of all. I know I'm monologuing, so bear with me. But again, like, one of the things I care about with this show is not to get into like, gosh, we're just all bombarded by partisan crap. It's so, ugh. So help me understand this. Like, honestly, why him? Why is he a galvanizing force with all his flaws and warts and word salad rambling and why?
Yeah. Okay. It was a lot, but I loved it, and it's valid. For a moment, Donald Trump did me no favors in my 2022 race.
Yeah, according to Times, like, you were the Trumpiest candidate who wasn't endorsed.
And I didn't even mind not getting the endorsement.
You needed to have a TV show.
I think
he likes TV show people.
I think, I used to say the best thing Donald Trump could have done for me was endorse me in that 2022 race. The second best thing he could have done for me was endorse Dr. Oz. Because everyone had a knee-jerk reaction against Dr. Oz, and it forced our people to really get out here, do the research, and find the right conservative to get behind. So that was the best thing he could have done for me. But in those so I didn't mind him not giving me the endorsement. But those last 5 days, he did me absolutely no favors, right? He put the green light on others to start lying on me and, and trying to destroy my character. They did not. But they did enough to muddy the waters to where something I had earned the right to be in that position. It was stolen from me because people just didn't want me. And what
do you mean by that? It was stolen from you?
I could have won had it not been, I believe I would have won had it not been for, they were telling our voters, these were more MAGA sounding people telling our voters in 2022 that she could be a member of Black Lives Matter. I am Black, so I could be.
So this was like the other campaigns, doing style stuff.
And other MAGA influencers were given the green light to come out and to just sully the water around me. We don't need to prove anything. We're in the last 5 days, just throw whatever you can at the wall and whatever, just dull the enthusiasm for her.
Sounds like politics, but
it was politics, but it was very dirty, and I had earned the right to be there. I only had $1.6 million, so I didn't have the money to go back at these people.
Yeah, right.
They have very loud voices and platform. So I say all of that to say Donald Trump did me no favors in 2020. I have no reason to be loyal to anyone but to myself, my family, and my God, and this wonderful country that allowed me to build a life for myself. So I put that as, I am not in a cult. I do not believe he can do no wrong.
There's some who cross into the zone of
and I met some of them, and it is very odd.
So you want Caesar, huh? You want Caesar? Is this what you
very
want?
Very odd. But I say all of that to I want to lay that. I want to get on the record of saying that first and foremost. Now, if I was looking for, and I know you probably have heard this retort, for a pastor, then Donald Trump would not fit the bill. When I was the national grassroots director for the Vivek Ramaswamy campaign, Vivek is a Hindu. He is not a Christian. And yet I would take him into predominantly Christian circles. One in Iowa that comes to mind. I had 50 uber conservative pastors in this room. I put Vivek in the room and I said, y'all have at him, right? And the goal was that if we were looking to promote a pastor, if we were looking for someone to go throughout America and teach Christian biblical principles, Vivek would not be your person.
And certainly not Trump.
And certainly not Donald Trump, right?
Yeah.
But when you understand what the role of the presidency is and the power that that person has, even in recent memory of just comparing what it has meant to have Biden in that seat versus just 4 years earlier, what it meant to have Donald Trump in that seat. We don't have to imagine what a Trump presidency will be like because we've already lived through that. Now, I was in support of Vivek, but Vivek is not on the ticket.
Mm-hmm.
I have one or two options, and I see where our country is going, and I'm looking for someone, not the person I was initially supporting, certainly not someone who helped me in my own race, but I am a grown woman. I understand what is at stake. And that is how I'm basing my decision. And I think that's how we should look at this particular role. We are now, my son is 18. So we have wars, rumors of wars all over the place. The world is literally on fire right now.
It's scary.
And we have a 25% deficit in our military recruitment. So where are they going to find these young men to go fight these wars? So I'm thinking from that lens as a mother and a potential of a draft and my son being caught up in that. I'm thinking of the probably irreparable harm we have done to ourselves in having just an open border. I know they like to tell us 10 million. I think it's more like 20 million. Who knows? The point is no one really knows.
Yeah, the data is not reliable on that front. And I have very mixed feelings about the issue, but it's definitely the case that black market, people living in the shadows, coming in the country,
300 plus thousand children missing. Like, where are these babies, right?
Yeah.
Sex trafficking, human trafficking. I mean, what's going on? Fentanyl. I was just reading an article yesterday out of Epic Times. 100,000 Americans die every year, 70,000 just from fentanyl, right? And the fact that most of them are coming through the border. And I'm right there in Philadelphia. You remember, what is the park? I can't think of the name of the park right now, but I took Vivek in that setting where you see these zombies, people who are just lifeless. Like, where's the hope and the purpose?
I mean, we're here in Austin, Texas, and there's a lot of heart-wrenching despair that you see on the streets.
It's despair is a perfect word. The oppression of it all, the lack and the apathy coming from people who feel powerless, that there is no one's listening to them. And, you look at the response. I don't know how much of this is propaganda, but you're looking at what's happening in North Carolina right now. And
you've been lighting up Twitter with the comparison. I don't know the details enough to get into some debate about what's happening with FEMA, other than I would agree with you that FEMA sucks. So would the people of New Orleans and many other instances of the government's not really good at these things.
No, they're not.
It puts itself into the position. It seems to actively. We saw this in COVID in a big time way. Like FDA, CDC, they are control freaks and bad at their job. So they simultaneously don't do the thing they say they're going to do. And they actively try to stop private citizens from stepping up to help.
Yes.
They get in the way actively and say, no, we got this, I have the authority. They're like
Exactly.
Cartman, smashing the people who would otherwise be helping.
I'm telling you, you cannot make this up. And I don't know if it's incompetence, indifference, or intentional, or a little bit of all three, right? But what I do know is that it's happening. And so that is what I try to fix my mind on. I don't know why these people are doing the things they're doing, not just Democrats, but I saw it within the Republican political consulting world. I mean, just horrible. It feels intentional, or just woefully incompetent people, right? Who make money no matter who win or lose, right?
The scope for criminal incompetence in our government, I think, knows no bounds. So we can go pretty far into like you just destroyed the country without it being a mustache twirl. Although I am getting more mustache twirling as they get older.
It feels like it.
So there's a couple other things we can talk about that can be spicy and fun. One is for a lot of people who would see themselves as kind of reasonable normies. They look at what happened in 2020 and January 6th and the the riot at the Capitol, whether you want to call that an insurrection or not, it's weird to have an insurrection and nobody brings guns. I am not with like the news media on January 6th, but when it happened, I was horrified watching those images on television of people storming into the Capitol on January 6th.
And it was programmed for you to feel horrible.
Well, it felt like it was the tail end of a year that was smashing the country. So you have this lockdown totalitarianism, you have cities burning with Black Lives Matter on behalf of an issue that, while tragic, was not numerical. Like there were 19 unarmed black men shot by cops in the prior year. So there was an asymmetry there. You've already said and they were allowed to give free rein. Like, oh, you can't get COVID if you're doing social justice activism. So all of that is a backdrop for like the powder keg that leads to January 6th. Yeah. But I understand you were enthusiastic about that rally, not necessarily about. Tell me about your relationship to that day and how you grapple with it now, being active in politics. What do you say to somebody who's horrified and feels like Donald Trump really violated what we should want the role of a president to be in our political leadership on January 6th?
My response, one, I don't grapple with it. Yes, I was there and I had a great time. I took 2 buses.
There's a clip.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I took 2 buses. We went, we marched, we sang songs, we prayed, and we got on the bus, and I was halfway home and my husband was calling me saying, do you know what's going on at the Capitol? No, had no idea. But the people we went with,
there were a lot of people there who wouldn't have known.
It was a lot of people, and it was like a lot of people, like thousands, felt like hundreds of thousands of people there.
Did you at the time believe the election was stolen? Because I think the rally was called "Stop the Steal." So why?
Well, one, I ran for office in 2020, so I wasn't just sitting on my couch looking at Facebook and, Fox News or CNN, but I was in the thick of it and watching these ballot boxes pop up miraculously, watching the 2 days before the election. My team was finally granted permission to go in and to see where the ballots were going to be processed and how they were processing it. And we took a lot of photos, and I was the first in the nation to file a lawsuit the day of the election at 8 a.m. in the morning, so before the end of that day. But we filed a lawsuit because this is wrong. This what is happening is not in line with what the rules are. And so that was at the very that was before the end of that day when we found out that, the election was not going to be on one day, but 3 days later, and they were going to change the rules as they saw fit to make sure they got the prerequisite number.
Wasn't there something that with Pennsylvania in particular, that the rules got changed without the legislature actually passing the law? Isn't
it was the Supreme Court.
Yeah, help me understand what happened in that moment in Pennsylvania, which, as we sit here today, Pennsylvania is a pivotal state for
Yeah.
the presidential election. It
And
was
very
pivotal
little
then, it's
has
pivotal now.
changed from 2020 to today. So
But
I
what
know,
happened? Why was it? What was the problem?
well, it's kind of fuzzy. I don't remember, people love to fact check. So please fact check it. Let me just put that disclaimer out there. But that's 4 years ago.
Mhm.
It feels like
Yeah.
like I've lived a lifetime in 4 years. But one, like I said, I was the first in the nation to file the lawsuit because it was against the rules from the legislator. And one is that instead of ballots being counted at individual precincts, they were now, because of COVID, going to be collected from around the state and put in, or from around the county, and put into a processing center. In that center, they could see when the ballots go through. You're supposed to have a date on the outside and on the inside, and if the date was not on the outside, then it was supposed to be rejected or put to the side and rejected and not counted. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court decided, nope, we're going to usurp the rules of the state legislator, and we're going to say count those ballots also, the ones that were supposed to be rejected. And I believe, you can fact check it, but I believe it was because of the date on the outside. There had to be, you have an outside envelope, and then
so
you
you've
have an
got
inside
irregular
envelope.
behavior.
The irregularity, and that's why people started saying irregularities, right?
I mean, it was also,
it went from 1 day to 3 days. There was a lot.
It was also this crazy backdrop of the pandemic, and there wasn't yet vaccines, whatever you think about whether the vaccines were good or toxic poison. But even so, like, it's kind of easy to forget that the 2020 election happened in 2020. It's like, it's treated like this isolated political thing, but the backdrop of that whole year was insane.
And it was a lot of shut up, sit down, be quiet to the American people. And I believe many on my side of the aisle felt like, okay, well, we are not going to take to the streets and burn down buildings and shoot people and riot and destroy livelihoods and commerce. We're going to go to the court, and we're going to seek our justice in the court. And what we saw from that election in 2020 through January was that the court was dismissing all of the cases based on standing, meaning they were not looking at the evidence. I know today, revisionist history, we say the courts looked at all the evidence and dismissed it. No, the courts looked at standing. I think my case was the only one they looked at some evidence, and then the judge made a decision. But outside
what was the decision?
Well, we can't disenfranchise people. Like, it went from facts, true, false, right, wrong, to emotions and what I think and what I feel. That was literally the judgment from this particular judge. Well, we can't disenfranchise.
So the rule was
people.
This should be dismissed on the letter of the law, but
the judge came back and ruled, well, we can't just disenfranchise.
I can't know the details of it. I'll take your word for it. I'll leave it to the viewer to.
And much of the detail in my mind is a little bit fuzzy with time, but that's essentially the hard recap. But the point of it is that many Americans from that November to January felt like, well, we're going to find our remedy in the court. We're not going to go out here and burn and tear down the nation, because that's not productive. We're going to, fight this out in the court. But then one right after the other, the court started dismissing based on standing, not evidence. So they weren't even looking at the evidence. They don't care. Shut up, sit down, be quiet.
I mean, there was also
deal with it.
There was also, I mean, I think back to, I shouldn't laugh. It's not really funny. But Rudy Giuliani and that other woman, I mean, it was a little bit of like the whole thing had a clown show feeling to it, watching it at that time. Like Rudy and what was her name? The lawyer that called herself the Kraken, which was weird.
Oh, yes. I forgot her name. But she's been sued heavily.
Yeah. So I think that what I'm trying to get at, without like trying to adjudicate all of this in this conversation, is that I think it's reasonable for people to be worried about what happened in that aftermath of 2020 and the way Donald Trump behaved. I think that's reasonable. I don't find it as crazy as others, because Hillary is the biggest election denier ever and spent 4 years saying that Trump stole the White House. So him feeling like it was taken from him simply makes him just like Hillary and just like Al Gore and just like every other politician that's denied the outcomes of their election. But what's your message to someone who might be sitting on the fence, who feels like Joe Biden sucked, but that Donald Trump's scary to them because of that?
Yeah.
That's their hang up. I know people like this who are like, he would be frankly, the lesser of two evils, but we have to have the transfer of power. And yes, it happened.
And it was a transfer. It was
did
a very
happen, obviously.
Transfer of power, and it was a peaceful transfer of power on January 20th.
I mean, I don't think Mike Pence would feel like it was going to be that peaceful. Like I'm trying
I don't
to
know. When I was there, I listened to Trump's speech. I was in the crowd. I did not get some subliminal message to go and riot.
You didn't get activated to begin.
I didn't get activated to go do anything. It was pretty much every speech we had heard up to that point. I went there because I wanted to hear the president of our country tell us what was about to happen. Hopefully it was going to be good news. And I wanted to be a part of that, of listening, of being there and showing that support. But I certainly did not get activated to go and tear down anything. And I was mentioning earlier about how people felt coming out of that 2020 election through January of not being heard and believing that our only source of remedy was going to come through the court. But then to see all the courts just kind of clamor up and get woke all of a sudden and not adjudicate according to the law, not even look at the evidence. And you had a lot of grifters on the Republican side, on the conservative side, come up and say, I got the smoking gun. And now you have this disinformation and this distortion in people's emotions, because people like myself knew what was going to happen under a Biden administration, that Biden wasn't going to be leading our country. There's a dark shadow somewhere. Maybe there are still people who believe Biden is running the country, but I believe most people who are not morally compromised, unless you're morally compromised, blind, deaf, and dumb, you do not believe Biden is running the country right now in this moment. And you see the result of what happens when America leaves the world stage and it becomes a vacuum for some of the most despotic regimes to stand up now and to use this opportunity to seize power. Our country, our world is in a very unnerving place right now. And it's as a result of what happened in 2020. Most of us saw this coming. I wrote a book about it, of what was going to happen. And my book reads like prophecy, and I'm no prophet, but it reads like prophecy right now because it doesn't take a PhD from Harvard or a nuclear scientist to understand history and what is about to happen to all of us. And I believe you had a lot of people come there on January 20th wanting to hear what was going to happen.
Or January 6th, you mean?
I'm sorry, what did I say?
January.
Sorry, January 6th of 2021. Very frustrated. Now, do I believe I don't follow it very closely because I have a life and there's a lot of other things that I want to, you only have 24 hours in a day. And you got to figure out how you're going to use that time. And so I have not kept up with all of the data that has come out to show that this was not an insurrection, that this too, there appears to be a lot of, intentionality behind it as well. I don't know. What I do know is that when I traveled the country, our nation is divided, but it is not divided. The line of demarcation is not between Democrats and Republicans, left versus right, blue versus red shirt. It is, and there appears to be more of us on our side who may have different political affiliations, like 80-20, it feels like, that we're not as divided as they would have us to believe, and that there are more of us, regardless of your political affiliation. I almost hate using the term, although I've used it numerous times here, Democrat, Republican, because that's not even a fair demarcation. It is those of us who love this country versus those of us who want to exploit the country, those of us who
That is a good
love
people
freedom.
versus just to push back a little bit. I think it's my worry for our time, and I literally say I think we are under attack by satanic communism. So I'm not somebody who's afraid from using very pointed language,
Yeah.
but I do worry at the same time that by framing things as love the country versus hate the country, there's parts of that that's actually like literally true. There's radical activists who say they, like Matt Walsh's new movie, the Am I Racist? There's race to dinner people. She's like, America's a piece of SHIT and it should be destroyed. She hates the country. Like, that's just a statement of objective fact. But is that really the right way? Is that a productive way to think about it? That it's those of us, and I'm sorry if I kind of interrupted you, but there's the majority of us that love the country, and then there's the people that hate it and want to destroy it. Do you think that's a productive frame?
I don't know if that's productive or not. Maybe it's not.
Do you think it's true?
But I believe it's true. So what I like, I mean, it's kind of like when you're running for office, and I would share this with Vivek. I certainly employed it when I ran for office. Is that the art is to figure out who is open to your message, who is willing to have, even if they disagree with you, but they're willing to listen. They're willing to reason. They're willing to debate and argue with you versus those who don't want to hear a word you have to say. They are ready to tear it down. You can't, because time is short.
Yeah.
You only have 24 hours in a day. How am I going to spend this time? I want to be around people. I don't want to only talk to people who eat red meat and believe what I believe. I find that, I mean, I enjoy it. You get encouragement, but I'm built to go into the world and to find people and to engage in conversation. And I love doing that with people who don't necessarily agree with me. But the art of that is not to waste your time. And there are some people, that 20%, that, I mean, it would take, I believe that they could not see truth even if it came and shook their hand, even if you laid it out straight to them and provide. I mean, I'm sure you are thinking of people that you have had this conversation. It seemed so common sense, like a boy. I'm just taking, because it's just so obvious that a boy cannot be a girl. And yet these people will not budge, no matter, you come and you talk about DNA, you talk about the human genome, you talk about plants and
well, some of that is also, it's also tragic, because if you're a parent who got frankly tricked into going along with this, you now have to either stay the course or confront the fact that you were complicit in harming your child, which is very,
Cole. Have you talked
very painful. I haven't, but I've talked to others about this issue that, and my heart breaks for those parents who are trapped in decisions they feel like they have to stick with, or their whole identity will shatter and they will be broke.
And that's hard. But let me just say, you can apply that same line of logic I write about in my book to the Black community. There are so many Black people who realize that the Democrat Party has nothing for them, but they've stayed so long at the dance, they might as well just finish it out versus just cutting their loss. And again, to be Black and Democrat, it is truly a part of our identity. So you almost have to break yourself apart to say, yes, I'm Black, but I am not a Democrat, and it does not define me. So there's a lot of work that has to go on in the Black community to break apart your identity from this thing over here that they say, if you're like Biden said, if you don't vote for me, then you ain't Black.
Right. But such an outrageous statement.
But he said it because, and when you're dealing with, dementia of some sort, you lose the filter to realize, I should not say this part out loud. And so he said it out loud because everyone knows, but you've been at the party so long, right? You've invested so much, you've given up so much. And, and that applies not just to those parents, because I met some of them when I was out there with Vivek. He was very open with me, kind of pulling. I mean, I would travel with a lot of these young people who are now detransitioners and go into community. Because again, this is what I'm built for, is to let's have these uncomfortable conversations, because I'd rather you fight with me than for you to just ignore me altogether, or rather for you to engage in this battle of wit and reason than to just continue down the path that we're on, because no one is going to be served by that. And we have to do more of that.
So let's see. What have we talked about so far? We have talked about surviving the prospect of abortion after sexual assault, January 6th, transgenderism, all the things. I think we got almost all the things. We could talk about mass shootings if we want to get into that. No, I think our time is coming to an end, although I think we could talk for hours more. We are sitting here. It is early October. And I think there's a lot of nervousness in this country. I feel it. My friends, my family feel it. That there's a couple ways that this nervousness is manifesting. For some, they see this many loud voices say this election is the make or break for the country. And they will say that on the basis of the candidate and the worldview they think matters more to them. So like Elon's out there saying if Kamala Harris wins the election, this will be the last election because they'll turn the country into a single party state. They'll turn the country into California. That's kind of what he was implying. Obviously, all of the people who support the Democrats and the Democratic Party fly the flag that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy. They've been saying this since he got elected in 2016. Democracy dies in darkness on the Washington Post. If you don't want to, where do you stand on this, on how important this election is? And as someone who has heard, this is the most important election of our lifetime, I'm a little weary of this.
Yeah.
So I hear that and I kind of roll my eyes, even though I'm very worried about the future.
Yeah.
I feel very torn about this.
Yeah.
So how do you think about what is hyperbole about this election and what is reality? Where do you stand?
Yeah. We should be very concerned about the direction of this country under Kamala Harris. I believe we should be very concerned about the direction of the country, even if Donald Trump gets in office. I believe we've lost so much that only God knows if we can get our country back on track again. Or, the fact that we tend to think of ourselves in this isolated bubble. But Venezuela is very real. Iran is very real. Russia is very real. China and their influence and impact on the world, and how they're, dominating most of these major institutions all across the nation. We are not in a bubble. The world is, we're not so secure. So I think we should have great concern. But how do I deal with it? Having walked behind the curtains, the political curtains in my own race, having walked behind the curtains alongside Vivek, knowing a lot of the people and having conversations, I believe our hope, where I am right now, having been very involved in politics, my hope is in Jesus, honestly. And I don't say that to be trite. I am on a daily basis seeking him and looking for him and listening to him, fasting and praying that he saves this country and that he saves the world, that he does not give us what we deserve. We probably deserve, like I thought we deserved Hillary Clinton in 2016. I believe we probably deserve Kamala Harris. That's how she's so ridiculous. And to now have the greatest country in the world be ran by that person. Like, yeah, we probably deserve that when you look at some of the things that we have allowed to occur. Abortion and, mutilating our children, chemically castrating little boys, and we're all just sitting back being so silent about it, as if, okay, well, I don't want to be shunned. But I am praying that God does not give us what we deserve. I am praying for a reprieve. I am praying that God allow people like yourself. I love what you're doing here with this. When I was listening to your channel, and I was looking at the fact that you are bringing your whole self. You hear the dad podcast, like, okay, he's going to just be talking about dads and dad statistics. And then I click on and I listen, and you're bringing your whole self and having these rigorous conversations with people who don't necessarily agree with everything that you may agree with. This is what we need. And so I am praying that God gives us a reprieve so that good people, and that he opens up a door of opportunity for good people to have the necessary platform to affect change. You alluded to it earlier that politics flows downstream from culture, but culture flows downstream from entertainment, what we're listening to, I tell my children, you have to control what you watch and what you hear. Those are the gates to your heart, right? So you have to be very disciplined and mindful about it. And likewise, you're in a position and others, good people though, not the grifters who just come in and say buzzwords that excites so that they can get the impressions and the clicks, but who are willing to have rigorous conversations. I think that's going to be very narrative. I'm praying that God gives us a reprieve. I'm praying that God opens up the doors of opportunities for better people to get into positions of influence, to influence the culture. That's what I'm doing. A lot of prayer, a lot of fasting, a lot of disciplining myself. I believe that that is truly our only hope at this time. I believe things have gone so far, and I believe that that is our hope.
I ask this of every guest. This show's called Dad Saves America, not because I think I'm the dad that's going to save America, but I think that as men in particular, it is the role we play where our choices have the biggest impact on everything. Our choices have the impact on our kids, and then they go out into the community and change the future of the country. And so I think that is heroic if you embrace it. How do you think about your role in the American story, and I will add, how do you, so much of what we've talked about and your personal story especially is about overcoming a narrative of victimhood. So how do you see your role in the American story as someone who has accomplished a lot and otherwise would not likely exist at all?
Yeah. It was one of the things it was the reason why I share my story, and I made myself become vulnerable standing in front of rooms full of people to share my story, whether it was overcoming dire poverty. I mean, we grew up underneath a rock. How I was conceived, the struggles that I've had to endure to be able to create a life for myself. I share all of that. And I was very mindful of why I would share this, is because I want people to remember why this is the greatest country, why we need to protect her, why we need to rise up and to do our part. I'm the most unlikely person. Like you, I don't care a lot for politicians. And I think that's healthy also, but I just don't. And yet here I am running for office twice and working with Vivek Ramaswamy and looking still for opportunities to affect change. But I wanted people to see that if someone like me, with all of the drama and all of the chaos, but that something beautiful could come out of it. I wanted them to see that they could be involved as well. But I also wanted them to be reminded that this is the greatest country and to be inspired to fight for this country.
Kathy Barnette, thanks for being on Dad Saves America.
Thank you for having me. This has been great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.